about the future of media, the future of TV. How my company and my background has helped to change that future.
The way he started his company by deciding actually that I'm just going to start it and then I'll see what I'll do.
So everything I do, I always think about how can I avoid being the bottleneck.
What I learned from here is that in everything is to see the opportunities.
I want you all to welcome with a huge, big startup brand welcome, Michael Lantz.
Wow.
Wow, thank you.
How did that feel?
Pretty good. But you did the practice run before, so I was sort of...
Well, do you usually get welcome like this when you walk into a room?
So to be honest, I'm speaking quite a lot at conferences, and it's quite sleepy events, to be honest. You know, all the people at these events, they are sort of multitasking. They're doing their... I'm sure no one of you are sort of doing your mobile phone at the same time as listening to this, but that's what's happening at the conferences like that.
Well, to begin, tell us, Michael, who are you?
So you summed it up pretty well. I mean, I'm definitely from southern Sweden. I grew up in very much a sort of middle-class Swedish standard family type of way, right? So I think the standard way of becoming someone in Sweden is to go to the university, right? So after military service, I went to the university, and since my family didn't have any other connections than outside of than in southern Sweden, I went to Lund University, which was a great experience. I think that's what was really when I grew up as a person. And the startup community in the mid-90s, when I went to university in Lund, was pretty good. I was a couple of pretty good entrepreneurs. So I decided actually to join my first startup, not as an entrepreneur, but as an employee, which was a great experience. This was a company called Cellavision, which is now listed at the Stockholm Stock Exchange, where I was one of the early employees. So I think that's to me, I've always been attracted by the startup community, and I think the Swedish spirit of exploiting technical prowess internationally is something that really appeals to me personally. I went to university as an engineer, even though I did some sort of business administration classes. I was really an engineer at heart, and I still am, even though I haven't sort of written a line of code in 15, 16 years now.
Well, you and me both. I also started as a programmer back in the 90s. But you grew up in a small city in Ystad. When we spoke earlier, you said that, well, it's one of those places where it's always grey.
Right. Yeah, so I think, you know, Ystad, if people say that, oh, that's a nice place, that's a fantastic place. I've been there, because many people have been in Ystad. It is a pretty good place in the summer, right? Because that's when everyone is coming there from Stockholm and everywhere else, right? So it's pretty busy, and there is a lot of things happening. You have a lot of cultural activities, a lot of restaurants only opening in the summertime. But if you go to Ystad in the winter time, there's nothing there, because then suddenly everyone is gone, except the people who actually live there. So it's pretty grey and dull.
But you moved from Ystad to Lund, which is not, that's like 40 kilometers.
60.
60. Oh, okay. And you moved there for studies. Tell us, what did you study?
So I studied engineering physics. So that's you know, that's the choice if you don't really know which engineering branch you want to study, right? I think in hindsight, I should probably have chosen computer science or something, because I was always, I was essentially, I wouldn't say ignoring, but I didn't spend much time on the sort of physics part. I was sort of focused on the practical applied mathematics and computer science, which was really what I graduated in.
And it was during your studies in Lund you came in contact with entrepreneurship and startups?
Yeah, that's correct. I already mentioned my first company, so that was founded by Christopher Reyes, who is a well-known serial entrepreneur in the Lund area. He was extremely inspiring, and I feel privileged of having worked with him in that small community. So I was probably employee number 10, and we were a very close-knit group, and we were participate. I had investor presentations already when I was 25 and sort of newly graduated, because there was no one else to do it. Right? If someone had to present, I was there to. I was responsible for the development of the image recognition algorithms for a blood cell application. Doesn't really matter, but no one else could actually explain the algorithms to the investors at the time. So I was sort of used to that from very early on.
So you were both the programmer and the pitcher?
Yeah, oh, pretty much. I think the part of being a small startup is that you're pitching not the company, but you're pitching the employees in the company, right? So I think Christer realized that very early on, right? So he sort of shared the burden of pitching to VCs with key employees in the company, which was a great learning experience for me. I'm sure I didn't do a particularly good job, but it didn't really matter because Christer wanted to show that we have these young, enthusiastic developers, and we're going to the next level. We're changing the entire ecosystem here, and why don't you join us on this ride? That was the story he was selling, not exactly the content of the presentation. So I think for me personally, that was extremely valuable and worth a lot later on when I had to pitch the Accedo story to people.
And now we're at the point of where you actually find the idea that you started Accedo with. And for some of you, or maybe most of you, don't really know what Accedo do. So tell us, what was the first real initial idea? What was it?
So fundamentally, at the time in 2004, it was still, most people had like 500k internet, which was sort of called broadband at the time. Many people still have dial-up internet. Sweden was ahead of the curve compared to everywhere else in the world. So we had this analysis that clearly this is going to change, right? So internet capacity will be cheaper. The last mile problem, there was a lot of talk about the last mile problem 10 years ago. No one is talking about the last mile problem anymore. But back 10 years ago, it was a huge problem. This will be solved at some point. So if this is solved, there will be a high-speed connection to the home. What will be the big change that is happening if there is a high-speed connection to the home? Well, clearly, the main part of it, we already had internet at the time to the study, if you will, right? So people were using computers, and it was probably fine with a 500k internet to your computer. But what happened in the living room? Nothing happened in the living room back then, right? So we were still excited about digital TV, which was essentially the same thing as you always had, but with better images and more channels and better sound, essentially. But it was the same as we always had. We had 50 channels instead of 10 channels, but that was pretty much it. So we felt that when the beginning of the 2000s, we saw that the telcos, the telecom operators, they were starting to investigate how can we deliver a TV service using our internet connections. The term IPTV was launched at the time. So these telcos were launching IPTV to the consumer, but they were doing it the same way as the TV operators. they were just bundling 50 channels and selling it as a 200 SEK subscription. What's fun with that? Essentially, they may have sold it as a 179 subscription instead of a 199 to be competitive, but they weren't using the IP connection they had to the living room. So we felt that there was an opportunity for a company to deliver the value of the IP connection to the living room. So the idea we had was to create a company which exploited the IP connection, the living room IP connection. That was fundamentally the idea, and then we needed to figure out what kind of things can we deliver on this IP connection. That was the hard part. But we had this vision that if every living room was connected with a high-speed internet, things have to change. Things have to change, and we can deliver those changes.
We're all now sort of used to having an ecosystem of incubators and support and organizations, stuff like that. And you're actually part of something that could be sort of the early stages of what is now a very developed ecosystem in Stockholm. Your first office out in Kista, was it? You were sitting at what is now what was it called? Quick Office?
Right. I can't say that Quick Office was an incubator, but it did actually have a lot of tech startups at the time. And what is now Sting was in the same office. So there was sort of an informal community, but the Quick Office in itself is just a real estate. I'm not sure they exist still. It was just selling the office space. So that was the first office we had. And then we moved into iCube. So iCube was Johan Stahl von Holstein's incubator.
How many here do remember iCube?
A few of you.
A few of you.
So I think iCube was a very interesting idea. It was an incubator, but it was what I would call a hands-off incubator. Right? So Johan has this vision that there's no way we can do the work of an entrepreneur. Let's get everyone in, and they will run their company, and we will be there if they need any help. Right? So it was pretty much a hands-off incubator, whereas some incubators are pretty hands-on. There is a mentorship, there are programs, internationalization courses. You may get some money and so on, but this was no money involved. You had the space, there were communities and so on, but you had to run everything yourself. Which suited us perfectly well, right? We didn't want any mentors, right? We wanted to be able to ask someone. We wanted to get the access to Johan's network. So if if I can pop in and ask him, do you know any good legal advisor? I knew that I could get that advice, but I didn't want anyone to look at our business plan because we felt that we could do that. So that suited us perfectly well. And we stayed within the iCube community for 3 years. So probably, well, maybe longer than we should, but we actually liked it so much. So we were part of both the office in downtown Stockholm at the time and then the office in Kista.
And you were surrounded by a lot of other startups in the media industry. What do you think? And most of them never really got out of iCube. What do you think made you different?
Well, so I think a couple of things. These are observations. They may not be true, but these are my observations. I think iCube was very much skewed towards B2C companies because I think Jonas Stahl von Holstein liked B2C companies. And we were a B2B company, so I think that set us apart, right? So we had a different mindset on we wanted to deal with customers. We were out meeting people instead of creating sort of the best website or whatever the B2C company would do. The second thing was that we actually had revenues at the time, right? So we were. So I'm sure you will ask about this. How did we fund the business initially?
We'll definitely get there.
Right. So we did have revenue. So even though we started out with the services I talked to you about, right? So initially, I mean, the first couple of years we didn't have those revenues because it took time to develop them and launch them and so on. So we were still dabbling with consultancy, because that was what we new, right? So we were sort of bringing in revenues from working as consultants, which is we have a working 40 hours a week and doing consultancy, and then the rest of the week goes to run your company. I think everyone here is an entrepreneur, sort of recognizes the need to have a real job that brings in the money. So we were doing the same thing, right? And I think that's was a difference between a couple of or most of the other companies there.
So what you were doing was what for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years it's really been called bootstrapping.
Well, the first 3 years, I would say, before we had the first round of funding, we definitely were bootstrapping the company.
What would you say is the biggest value that looking back that you got from the years at iCube?
So I think it added credibility. So I think being a small company when we were like 5, 6, 7 people, if we can tell a story when we're out, even internationally, if we were out talking to potential customers and partners that we were a part of iCube, one of Sweden's most well-known incubators, and we were doing this, and we may have mentioned sort of the serial entrepreneurs like Johan and so on. That added credibility because then we could tell the story that someone had vetted us. This was before we had funding, right? But someone had said that these guys are good enough to be part of this community, and that was extremely helpful. Other than that, I think I can definitely say stuff like the community and so on, but that's a given, right? So I wouldn't say that there were any other clear values.
But that's so having sort of the right people and the names and the brand behind you, even at the early stage, and
right,
being able to say that these people, these successful entrepreneurs, they believe in us, and having that as a credible story behind you
was extremely important. And also when we raised the first real money, it was important to have sort of a home, a place where they could come and visit you. And instead of being in a basement somewhere, we actually had a good-looking office with a person that will give out badges for the visitors and so on. That sort of gives a premium impact to potential investors. Even though, I mean, they can logically understand that this is just show, they're in this incubator and so on, but it actually adds a lot of credibility and a lot of value to the pitch.
We're slowly but surely getting to where we're sort of where you're going global, and we're going to hold off to that until a little bit after we've had some coffee. But just before we get some coffee and stretch our legs a little bit, I wanted to look a little bit on the technology, because in some ways it's sort of abstract. But tell us a little bit about what is it that you actually build, and what is it that you sell?
That's a very good question. How much time do you have?
Well, until some people need to run to the bathroom. But
all right, okay. So I'll take the short story. So first of all, I think it's important to look at the life cycle of Accedo. So I mentioned back where we started, the connected living room. We were not credible to create sort of a full experience to our customers. We added these add-on services. What happened, this was actually a pretty healthy growth. I mean, we grew every year from start until until now, to be honest, right? So we grew every year. We raised our first round of funding in 2007, and then what happened was really the emergence of the smartphone. So iPhone was launched 2007. App Store was launched 2008. Android was sort of introduced 2008, 2009. So suddenly there was this talk about apps. And our story of these add-ons suddenly became a story about we're selling apps, right? We're selling apps for TV. And everyone understood what we were selling. And there were people in these companies suddenly having budget for apps. So it was like instead of us having to explain to everyone what we were doing, we were selling apps. That was the one thing. The second thing was that suddenly there were more devices to deploy these apps on. We have struggled to work on IPTV set-top boxes, and for anyone who have worked with any type of technology, IPTV set-top boxes is really not the best technology. I mean, you're buying
it's
stuff.
not very creative.
Well, it could be creative, but you're buying stuff from China and you're giving it to the lowest bidder, right? So it's like you're squeezing in stuff in a $20 piece of hardware. So it's really, really challenging to get anything to fly on these boxes. At the same time, Apple launched like $800 devices, right? So clearly there was a lot of difference. But what happened was that in the aftermath of the launch of the smartphones, you had the launch of other connected devices. So the smart TVs, the game consoles, which were on the market already, but the next generation game consoles were connected. So what happened was that we had connected devices in the living room, which suddenly had good performance. Clearly, all of our customers at the time, we had 30 or 40 different customers buying these add-on services. These customers were interested in getting their core services on these new devices. So we could use our customer relationships, our knowledge of building stuff on crappy devices, to be honest. So we could take that experience and turn it around and sell what is now called a multi-screen service, something that is running on outside of the core experience. So that is what is driving our growth today, right? So these multi-screen services are delivered to the consumer, and we're the engine behind those multi-screen services. The way we are working is that we have a combination of client-side technologies and cloud-based technologies. So all of these devices, they have pretty capable client platforms, right? So the way to create the best user experience, well, not the set-top boxes, that's a different story. I'll come back to that when we look at the future later on. But all these new devices, they were pretty capable devices. So you execute the user experience on the client side, and you control the user experience from the server side. The way Accedo is working is that we have a number of cloud platforms to control and monitor and manage the user experiences. We have, for those companies who want to launch many apps, we have what we call an app management platform that can actually manage multiple applications for pay TV operators, for example, who want to control the life cycle of many applications on a device. We have a range of client-side products, which are ready-made applications. I spoke about the add-ons previously, right? So we have a suite of add-ons that you can bring into your experience. We also have ready-made core applications in an application suite we call VIA, which are ready-made applications, state-of-the-art applications for video consumption, so video on demand and linear TV and program guides and catch-up TV services that can be deployed on any device in the marketplace. So if a customer comes to us, typically a media company, a TV channel, an on-demand company, or a pay TV operator, we can launch ready-made services on any device out there. We can just connect to their video feeds, and suddenly you have something that would run on any device. So our ability of delivering this end-to-end solution on a multi-screen experience is something that is no one else is really doing this, right? Because we were sort of 2 or 3 years before everyone else. So there are companies doing it for like a mobile expert company, or there are companies doing it for like a game console expert company, or we are doing it for all devices, regardless of it's a Roku set-top box or a mobile phone or tablet or whatever. And that's a unique offering to the market.
So you saw the connected living room. You built the apps and the App Store before we even knew what that was. And now we're in, what, 2006, 2007?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's also the first time that you actually started taking in investment.
Right, which to be honest wasn't by choice, right? So we had the same business plan as You know, I was bragging about us being consultants. We did the Excel exercises and everything. We were supposed to raise money 6 months after we started the company. So we had some funding, our own funding, and our first chairman put in some very, very minor stake at the beginning. But those 6 months became 9 months, became 12 months, became 15 months, and so on. So our first sort of real seed round was 2 years after we started the company. So in May 2006, which was definitely much, much further down the road than we expected it to be. So that's probably the big learning point for me. I don't know how many entrepreneurs are here looking for a sort of investment, but it takes a lot of time. And investors are fundamentally skeptical about everything you tell them, right? So they want to see proof before they invest.
And you need to start selling your products or your services.
Exactly, exactly. So essentially we didn't get that seed funding until we had succeeded, right? We had our first customers deployed and live, and we had the revenues from those customers, and that's when they wanted to invest.
And so you had a small round in 2006 then, but you got your first major investor in 2007.
Exactly. So the first major investment round was the Series A, if you will, was about 10 million SEK in 2007, which was really what made the difference of us being a sort of a small company to a medium-sized company, if you will.
And this was actually also at the time not really surprising, but when you really saw that now we have the opportunity to go international and start launching this on a global scale.
Right. That was, you know, for those of you who have raised money, when you raise money, you're supposed to tell the investors what you should use the money for. And one of the bullet points in the presentation was to go global, to have an international presence. At the time, we were only in Stockholm. So we decided to do that, and that's a very... I'm a strong believer that if you're in a business-to-business company, you need to be close to customers. You can't be expected as a customer to trust a vendor if you're not there, if they can't look you in the eye and they don't know that you're there if you need them, right? So we understood this, and we wanted to go global. So we did two things in 2007. The first thing was I moved to London because it's more or less impossible to go global and travel around the world if you're based in Stockholm. It's better now. Back then, we didn't have any direct flights to anywhere, essentially. So I moved to London with my fiancée. And the second thing was that we set up a company in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong?
Yeah, in Hong Kong.
That's the first place you go.
Exactly. Well, Hong Kong is it's a fantastic place to run a business. So I can definitely recommend that. It's a fantastic place in general. It's an incredibly dynamic city. You can smell the pulse of the city. It's one of a kind.
And you said that it's the best place in the world to start and run a business.
Yes, it's incredible. Everything is made for commercial reasons, right? So virtually no taxes. It takes an hour to set up a company. Everything just works.
But with the cultural difference and everything, I mean, it's not really the first place you go as a Swedish company.
No, that's true. So the I alluded to that you need to be close to customers. We had an opportunity in beginning of 2007 to work with PCCW. For those of you who don't know, PCCW is the largest telco in Hong Kong. So at the time, because they're a tiny telco if you look at the global scale, but at the time, in the mid 2000s, they were the world's largest IPTV provider. So they had, when we started the company, was one of the things we had in, to show the market opportunity. So in our first business plan, PCCW alone were 25% of the global IPTV market. Because they launched already in the beginning of 2003 and were pushing out IPTV to all of their subscribers in Hong Kong. So it was an extremely important opportunity for us to sign PCCW as a company, as a customer. So we essentially went all in and promised PCCW, if you guys want to work with us, we'll set up a company here in Hong Kong. And they decided to, let's go with these guys. They've never been to our office in Stockholm, so it was essentially just, us going there and, trying to sell with a Swedish accent and PowerPoint slides, right? So we promised, we essentially promised we would set up an office here if you start working with us, and they decided to go with that. I think that was really the starting point of the globalization journey. We had a few customers before then international, right? So we had done some deployments in Norway. We have done some.
It's not international.
No, it's not international. We deployed with the BT in the UK, beginning of, I think we went live beginning of 2007, right? So we had a few brand name customers on sort of the reference sheet. But PCW was on a different scale. So I think that was extremely important for us to be credible in this world. So if every potential partner in the ecosystem, if we can tell them we're working with PCW, it was like, oh, right, these guys, they know what they're doing, because they was sort of the shining beacon in the industry at the time.
And there's an interesting story because you started a company there in Hong Kong, and you hired your first manager there. His name is Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that come about?
Yeah, so this opportunity with PCW was actually a joint opportunity with a partner company, an Australian partner company. So Mark is Australian. So it was an Australian partner company. They had actually the year before set up their Hong Kong office, but they ran into financial difficulties, so they decided to pull out of Hong Kong. So it was sort of logical that we then got the opportunity to take over Mark as an employee, and there was some benefits with this because they had prepaid benefits to Mark, right? So a flat and a company car and a number of things, right? We prepaid that for the entire year, so we can take over Mark essentially just by taking over his salary, and you could still have a competitive salary in Hong Kong, which was already back then one of the world's most expensive cities. So I think that was one of a kind of opportunity for us to actually expand with a senior, seasoned sales manager in a competitive market. And I think in general, my advice to all of you is that when you see an opportunity that may be almost too good to be true, go for it. So this, from our perspective, if I look back at this, the world's biggest IPTV operator. I have the opportunity of getting a seasoned local sales guy with all the connections. I don't have to pay market salary. Setting up a company doesn't cost anything, so we could just do this. I didn't even have to use the investment money to do this, right? Because so that was we could set this up without virtually no cost.
That is just incredible. And Mark is with you still.
Right, so he's heading up our North American region at this point, which is our single biggest market.
After Australia, you started in Spain, which also sort of became the gateway to South America later on.
Mm-hmm.
And but then you started probably where most people think you would have started, which was Palo Alto.
Right. Yeah, so I think most of the other offices were sort of driven from customer requirements. So we've set up the Hong Kong office, the Australian office, even the Madrid office was driven by customer requirements at the time. But the US office was a deliberate choice, right? So we decided that the world's biggest media market, probably half of the TV revenues in the world are in the US. We need to be there, right? Everyone tells us that it's extremely difficult to break into the US market, but if we're serious about this, we need to be there. So we had a few US customers already before we started the office, with essentially me going back and forth from London to various places. But we had no office. So when Mark decided that he wanted to go to the US, I offered him the position to start up the company in the US. Well, we had a company already before Mark started there, but to start up the office. So he's done that, and now we actually complemented. We made an acquisition in 2012, and together the staff from that acquisition and the staff we recruited, we're now about 30 people or so in North America.
But your customers weren't really in Palo Alto.
No, I think Mark wanted to be in Palo Alto to get that Silicon Valley vibe, right? So we indulged him and said that that's okay. Let's start the company in Palo Alto. But the customers in the media industry are primarily in Los Angeles and in New York. So we do have 3 offices in North America at the moment, which is may seem a bit ridiculous. But it's we do have 3 offices.
So we're starting to see a trend here. You're sort of following the customers and you're following your employees as well.
Pretty
so
much,
empowering the employees to go where they want to go as well.
No, so I think, look, if you're a B2B company, if you look ahead, right? So we've always tried to look at, if you look 10 years ahead, where do you want to be? Because clearly, if you're a B2B company, you need to have offices where the customers are. So all the big B2B companies, they have 20, 30, 40, 50 offices, because that's what the customer require. So at some point, we knew that we would always need to set up these offices. Otherwise, we would never survive as a B2B company. So the question, if you have that mindset, the question is really, in what order do you set up the offices? So if there is a clear requirement, either internal requirement, someone wants to move to a specific location, or a customer requirement, that I should listen to those requirements instead of being sort of too introvert.
So there wasn't really this global plan of like first we take this, then that, or was there a plan and you just didn't really follow it?
Well, there is always a prioritization plan, right? So we don't have endless amounts of money. We can't set up offices everywhere, even though it's not that expensive to actually set up an office. The cost of going global is really recruitment and management time, because it takes time to steer these new people and make sure that they are, to be honest, kept in line, right? Because otherwise they would go ahead and do something they prefer to do instead of what is beneficial for the company, right? So it takes a lot of management time. I've spent endless hours on the road going out around to the various offices and trying to preach the Accedo story. But it does take time in recruitment as well, and you have to realize that if that sort of key person leaves, you may need to start over again of that office. But the actual cost of setting up the office is not that great. I mean, there are offices like this in every major location around the world, and to register a company may take time, but it's actually not that costly. To find a bookkeeping agency, it's not that difficult. So it's primarily recruitment and management overhead.
I really want, before we end this interview, to start looking a little bit at the future as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't you think that we should? He knew that this was coming, so don't we want to hear what he think is coming in the coming years?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So after this, we'll do some brief reflections on this, and after that, you get to ask some questions. All right? So prepare your questions. So what would you say is, on a general basis, what is happening in the media industry today?
So we all know that there is a shift from sort of traditional TV viewing to something new, right? So we've seen the emergence of the new media companies. You know, I mentioned Netflix before. We have seen the emergence of companies like Viaplay here in Scandinavia, or HBO have launched direct-to-consumer services, and this is ongoing, right? So if we look at the media industry 5 to 10 years in the future, what is really the big shift is the shift of power, right? It's not about technology, it's the shift of power. Because the traditional media industry is controlled by the operators and the TV channels, right? The operators and the TV channels. So if we're now seeing a media industry where this is challenged from new entrants, at some point there will be an inflection point, and the existing players will need to respond. We're slowly seeing this happening at this point, right? But clearly the TV operators, which are aggregating a lot of media and delivering it as subscriptions, and the TV channels, which are aggregating single pieces of content and delivering it as a linear channel, they will become increasingly similar. right? Because they're all aggregating, they're buying content in different ways, but they're still buying content and they're selling it to the consumer. Right? So my take is that within 10 years, there will be marginal differences between what is today an operator, a TV channel, and an on-demand company, if you will. They will all deliver a packaged offering to a subset of the industry, their target group, essentially. And they will do it via multiple means of consumption, right? So some things will be suitable for on-demand content, typically libraries, TV series, movies, and so on. Some things will be suitable for a linear consumption, sports, game shows, Melody Festival, and so on, right? So you have some things that will always be live, but there's nothing that says that this live content will be distributed from what today is called a TV channel. 10 years from now, maybe one of today's operators will control Melody Festival, or maybe Netflix has acquired the right to Melody Festival, or HBO has the rights to the Swedish Hockey League. Why not, right? So this shift of power from the traditional value chain to the various players will change the way we consume media, right? So instead of having one operator and multiple TV channels and so on, you will likely have multiple services you subscribe to. You may not spend more than $5 to $10 on each service, but you may have 5 or 6 of them that fits your requirements. And I think this shift in the industry is happening already now. We see that. I'm not sure that many of you have multiple services. And of course, from our perspective, the more services, the merrier, right? Because we are delivering the shovels to the gold diggers, if you will, right? So we are making this happen in every country of the world, right? So the more services, the better for us. The more advanced services, the better for us. If everyone wants to create sort of multiple content types, multiple ways of engaging the consumers on many devices, that makes the ecosystem more complex. That makes it more difficult for any of these companies to do it internally, and they need to come to companies like us. So everything is sort of well aligned for us to benefit from this. I think the big change for us as a company would be going full circle, going back to where we started, right? So we started out with the set-top boxes. So delivering content to an IPTV set-top box, a $20 device, as I mentioned before. What is happening now is that the TV device market is becoming a sort of a bring-your-own-device market, right? So in the lingo of the industry, an OTT device market, so consumers can buy multiple devices and put them in front of the TV. And the operators will use these sort of new types of set-top boxes to deliver their experience to those devices, but it will still be a TV experience, and they would require to emulate something that is sort of creating the iPhone moment of the TV, right? So they would want to create sort of a truly immersive experience on the big screen. No one is really delivering on that promise at the moment. So everyone of you who's using the big screen interactivity would probably say that this is feels like the 90s, right? Because it is the 90s, right? So the TV experience is the 90s, even though, I'm sure, I don't know if anyone is here from Comhem, but I'm going to say some bad things about you. So you may have seen the TiVo experience from Comhem, right? Oh. And they're proud of this experience. Like, this is technology from which is 15 years old. I know. And it's in the industry. It's a bit of a joke. Why go down this route with something that is old and dusty? And this is the story over and over again in this industry, right? So people choose sort of trusted technology that has been deployed successfully in many cases, but that's not the way how to work with consumers in an internet industry, right? Consumers expect fast change and new things happening all the time. You need to fundamentally change the way you're consuming TV content and go to a internet cycle of change, and the retail devices, the OTT devices, can promise that change, and the legacy TV industry cannot really promise that change. So when that is happening, we will take go back to sort of the core of Accedo, so the delivering the TV experience on the TV devices, and we will do it in the best way possible globally. I think there is a great opportunity for us there.
And TV devices, that's sort of really generic now.
Yeah, well, so who knows what will happen, right? So I'm calling TV devices the big screen experience. So I fundamentally believe that even though I think many people here are primarily consuming content on mobile devices, most consumers out there still enjoy the living room experience, the big screen, the biggest screen in the household. There are 4K screens being deployed at this point. The big question is, what is the engine, what is the device powering these big screens? That device is what I call the set-top box, which is a 90s term, of course. But the next generation of set-top boxes, that's where I think Accedo will be playing a great role.
I think you guys could talk more on this issue afterwards. If you have more questions for Michael, we'll hang out, we'll drink some beer, and keep on asking the questions.
Good.
And with that, please give a big hand for Michael.
Thank you. Michael.